Hey y'all, Rob here with ATX.legal. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about expunctions and non-disclosures to clear your criminal history. First, a little disclaimer. This is not legal advice. It's not anything that forms an attorney-client relationship. If you do have questions about your specific situation, you're always free to give us a call or visit ATX.legal. But moving on, we're going to start in with some of the reasons why you might want to have an expunction or a non-disclosure. And it's very personal. Everybody kind of has their own reasons. The main one that a lot of people have a concern with is when they apply for a job, they don't want that showing up. But also licenses like professional licenses, gun licenses, things like that can be important as well as leasing an apartment. It's hard to lease right now. It's a pretty competitive environment. So with leasing an apartment, it can make a difference. And also sometimes just general reputation. People don't want to have a criminal history when their nosy neighbors look it up online. So, everybody's different, and those are kind of the main reasons, but maybe you have a different reason for wanting to get your criminal history expunged or sealed. But anyway, let's just jump right into it. Criminal history consists of three separate parts. So first off is the arrest or a citation if you weren't arrested. Second is going to be any kind of jail time you spent. And the last is the disposition. And what that is a conviction, dismissal, deferred adjudication, however the case was handled will be listed on your criminal history as well. Some people think that when a case is dismissed, it's just gone, but it's not gone because the disposition will show that it's dismissed, but the jail time, if any jail time was spent, as well as the arrest or citation will still be showing. So another common misconception that people have is that criminal charges will fall off after a certain amount of time, like a credit report. That's not the case. A criminal charge will be on there forever unless you do something about it or if at some point the laws change. Okay, now let's talk about eligibility. So there's two different ways to clear your criminal history. One is with an expunction, one's with an order of non-disclosure. And we'll talk about the differences between those, but just for now, think that an expunction is preferred. It's better than an order of non-disclosure. So for an expunction, there's really only a couple ways you can be eligible for an expunction. One is if you get your case dismissed. Another is if you're acquitted at trial. There is a third way if you have a governor's pardon, but it happens so rarely that I'm not going to really discuss that. So if your case is dismissed, and that can either be by the prosecutor dismissing it by motion or just not accepting the charges, then you're eligible for an expunction. For a non-disclosure, it's a little more complicated. Deferred adjudications are usually eligible, but not for all cases. Like family violence cases, you're not eligible to have that sealed. Some misdemeanor convictions are now eligible for a non-disclosure, but it's kind of complicated. I don't want to go into every single case because it would take too long, but just know that if you don't have any other criminal history and you got a misdemeanor conviction, there's a chance you're eligible for a non-disclosure. And that law changed recently, so if you have a case from back in the day, 1980s, that's probably not going to be eligible if you were convicted. There is a waiting period, and those waiting periods are different depending on whether you're getting an expunction or a non-disclosure. For an expunction, you can get that after the statute of limitations is passed. So the statute of limitations will be different for different charges. For some, it's 2 years, 10 years. There are some charges for which there is no statute of limitations. So what if you're charged with murder and you get it dismissed or you're acquitted? You might not be eligible for an expunction for your whole life. Now, there is an exception there. The prosecutors can waive that. So sometimes, even though they're not required to waive that waiting period, they'll say, okay, well, it was dismissed. We're going to waive the waiting period, and you can have that expunction. Non-disclosure waiting periods are a little bit different. There's a lot of different situations. Just talk to your lawyer if you think you're eligible for a non-disclosure. One more quick note on eligibility. There are some weird rules when it comes to multiple crimes committed at the same time. So the quintessential example of this is if you get charged for a DWI and you get it reduced down to an obstructing. So the DWI is dismissed, and the obstructing, you take some kind of plea, whether it be a deferred adjudication or a conviction. If you do take the conviction on the obstructing, there is some case law suggesting that you can no longer have the DWI expunged. So it's something to look out for. The case law is not settled on that. If you do have multiple charges at the same time, it's always best to have an attorney look at it. I can't really give you a one-size-fits-all answer for that. So if you have that situation, give us a call and we can talk it over and see if you're actually eligible for an expunction. All right, let's talk about the difference between a non-disclosure and an expunction. So as we talked about earlier, an expunction is better. The reason that it's better is because with an expunction, your case records are completely destroyed. No one has access to them, at least theoretically. So we're talking judges, law enforcement, prosecutors. Absolutely no one has these records because they are literally gone. This is the best possible outcome, and it's like your arrest never even happened. Non-disclosure, it's different. So they seal the records from public view. So if someone requests a background check who is a member of the public, that record is not going to show up. But prosecutors, judges, law enforcement, some employers, like hospitals, will be able to see those records. So it's not quite as good as an expunction, but with both a non-disclosure and an expunction, you can deny that the arrest ever happened if it comes up on a job application. So there are definitely advantages to a non-disclosure, even though it's not quite as good as an expunction. And just a quick note on juvenile records, those cannot typically be expunged. They can only be sealed. It's a completely different scheme. I'm not really going to be talking about juvenile records here. So let's talk about the process of getting an expunction. It can take up to 14 months. That's on the long end. Usually they're complete within 6 months. But if it's something where you need something expunged because you're applying for a job in a week, that's just not going to happen. It takes time. The way it works is we petition the court. If any parties object, like the prosecutor, they can contest and have a hearing, but usually it's uncontested, and if there is a hearing, it's usually just the judge signing the order. Once the order is signed, whether it's an expunction or a non-disclosure, the notice gets sent to the different entities that have records. So we're talking about the court, the district attorney, the jail. There's a list that you include in the order, and it gets sent out to all those. If you miss an entity that has a record, that's not going to be expunged. So it's important to cover every single entity, and that's really why you want to have an attorney do this. Even though some people can effectively do it pro se, a lot of times different entities get missed. So it really is good to have an attorney to petition for you. So the entities have up to a year to either send those records back to the court, who will destroy them, or send a notice that they've destroyed the records themselves. Interestingly, the FBI is not required to remove their records because this is all state law. We're dealing with state rules and regulations, but what the FBI does is they go along with whatever DPS says. So if DPS removes their record, they also send notice to the FBI, who also destroys their record. Quick note on Class C misdemeanors. It's the same process if you want to expunge a Class C, but Class Cs are not reported to DPS, so it's not always very important to have a Class C expunged. It does allow you to answer no when asked by an employer or someone else, so there is benefit to it, but just know that those Class Cs are not going to show up on a background check typically, and they're not really as important. Sometimes I talk people out of spending the time and money to expunge a Class C. So speaking of the costs, we charge a flat fee of $1,500, and about $450 of that is court fees. If you qualify financially, so if that seems like something that you're not able to afford, there is something called the University of Texas Expunction Project. It's a good program. Law students go through and do the expunctions under the supervision of an attorney. I know the attorney who runs the program. It's a very good program. So if you do qualify for that financially, the only drawback of that is I think they only do it twice a year, so you might be waiting a little while. but it is a very good program. So one quick note on private companies. So in addition to the public entities that gather information, there's a bunch of private companies that either gather mugshots or just criminal information. So these companies are also required to destroy their records with an expunction or seal them from public view with a non-disclosure, but they don't always comply. So sometimes you do have to send a judge's order to their legal department and get them to do it. So what I usually do is ask my clients to let me know if they see their record anywhere on the internet. We can make sure that an order is sent to that company. And if they don't comply, there's not a lot we can do other than maybe get contempt charges against them. But it's hard if they don't voluntarily comply. There's not a lot of teeth to the expunction rules. But typically, as long as their legal department is responsive, they will comply and they will remove those records. Okay, I hope that answered some of the questions you had about clearing your criminal history. If you do have any more questions, or if you think you're eligible, you're not sure, you can visit ATX.legal or give us a call. If you do want to look into your criminal history, one of the best ways to do that is to request your criminal history. You got to go to a website called identago.com. Link will be in the description. I'll also include a link to the UT Expunction project so that you can check them out as well. Anyway, thank you for watching and good luck.